the one thing about this industry is that we don't retire from the industry retires us. But even if whatever, it's the truth. But even if at some point I'm not acting or doing it, I'm pretty sure that God willing, I'm gonna be working until the day that I'm not able to anymore.
Now, are there roles, or you don't have to be specific and say, "Hey, I'd love to do exactly this."
Right.
What role, or what would you like to be cast at that you haven't before, have always longed to play?
That's a good question. I think there are a couple of projects that I'm working on now. We'll see what happens. The interesting thing about it is, for me, I've kind of, after the first Best Man, I did a lot of romantic comedies. So I kind of was known as kind of like the romantic comedy lead. But, I really wasn't I didn't have a lot. Lance in the first Best Man was very serious. Lance in the second Best Man was very serious. Ricky and the Boys in the Hood. I mean, I've never really been like the quote unquote comedic cat, but I was also always known as the comedic lead. So there's some movies that I want to do that's just straight dramatic. There's one that I'll be pitching. I think in 2 weeks I'll be pitching a movie that I'll be playing a lead that's very dramatic, but it has a very is a very strong dramatic character with a sensitive side that he has to nurture someone along despite what he's been through, and I'm really looking forward to something like that. And what I'll do is, when it gets made and when we do it, I'll come back on and I'll tell you what that is. I know you're gonna ask me what it is.
All right. Okay.
All right.
We will make that bet. You also haven't, played, I'm trying to think, a lot of villains. Like, do those kind of characters appeal to you at all?
They do, but they don't, and I get it. They don't really think of me as, the villain. And I get it. I do, because sometimes it's really hard to see someone when you've seen them one way for so long. It's really hard to see them another way, and they cast types. Just like they cast me as a quote unquote type, they'll cast the villain as a type, because there's some people out there who play great villains. So I get that, and I've had some opportunities. I played a villain before. It wasn't in the best of movies, and maybe it wasn't the best performance, but I would like to play a fun villain. Like Denzel, and trust me, I mean, Denzel, I feel he's top of the food chain. I could never say that, I can even come close to the type of performance, but he played a fun villain in Training Day, so I would love to have an opportunity to play a villain that I can just have some fun with.
Do you, because you were in The Perfect Guy, you could have played the role of Michael Ealy.
You know what? Yeah, I mean, actually, that's, that was I would have loved to have Michael's role in that movie, because, that was a fun role. But, I got hands down to Michael. I got to give him a lot of props. He did a great job in that movie. He had a lot of nuances in that movie, and I thought he did an incredible job. But yeah, I would have loved to play that part. I've found myself, and even with that movie, the studio, the head of the studio called me and said, "Hey, I have this thriller, and take a look at it." I was like, "Okay, cool." I read it. I said, "Which role were you thinking about me for?" And I didn't tell him. I was like, "I would rather play the villain." But he said, "I was thinking about the role that I play." I was like, "Oh man, okay." And so I did it. And the thing about it is, the one thing that I think that I've been blessed in my career is that I've always had roles to where people are rooting for me and not against me. And even in the signature films, like, Boys in the Hood, people were rooting for me, to get that scholarship and make it out the hood. In The Best Man, the original Best Man, people rooting for me just to get through, get through my wedding, after what my best friend did,
Yeah.
and then even in the sequel to The Best Man, people were rooting for me to get that rushing title and just go home for my wife. So I've been fortunate to play roles that people are always rooting for my character, and it's kind of like they've been somewhat of an emotional draw for the audience, to where they get emotionally engaged. And so even with that thriller, he's like, well, we want people to root for you. We want them to feel for you when you die. And I was like, okay, cool. But like I said, Mike did a great job. Michael did a great job in that role with Sanaa. And so, it's just a part of it.
Well, the problem is you're too convincing as a good guy. And this other project that you're working on that I asked you about, quickly, before I get to some fun stuff with you, is only helping to continue to, amplify this idea of you being a good guy. I want to talk about your faith-based podcast,
Yes.
Jesus versus Big Joe. Yeah?
Yes.
Which sounds like a very fascinating concept. Why don't you explain what this podcast is?
Yeah, Jesus versus Big Joe. It's a huge podcast that I'm really excited about. Let me go back. So I've done a faith-based project before with TD Jakes.
Right, not easily broken, correct?
Not easy broken. Mm-hmm. And so the opportunity. So I listened to a podcast. I was in New York about 2.5 years ago. And someone told me about the Aaron Hernandez podcast. And I had heard about Aaron Hernandez.
Yeah.
It was great, right? You heard, right? It was a great podcast.
Mm-hmm. It was great.
I had heard about the story, but I didn't know. I was like, okay, podcast. And I was on the set, and guy told me, hey, just check it out. And just one day, I said, all right, I was waiting in my trailer to shoot a scene. I said, let me just go ahead and put this in. I listened to the podcast, and I could not stop. I was just so riveted. It was my first time that I was just riveted by that type of storytelling on a podcast. So I said, I want to find something. And fortunately, I was blessed with this podcast, Jesus versus Big Joe, this young, up and coming, prolific, passionate producer by the name of Kyle Hogan, has the story of an athlete, Joe McGuire. He was a huge offensive lineman, All-American, all-world, going to USC, and then he had his faith tested. He was definitely slated. Jackie Slater, Pro Football Hall of Fame, was saying one of the best offensive tackles that he's ever seen, and he ended up having to have like 18 surgeries on his arm and have his arm completely cut off at the shoulder. And so he went from being this huge football player with a huge promise to, hitting rock bottom. And it's a true story of faith, perseverance, and the struggle. It deals with mental illness, addiction, and it's really a journey of coming from rock bottom and having faith. And now Joe McGuire, he's a pastor, in a church. And so it's a huge, and when I heard the story at first, I heard the pitch from Kyle. I was like, okay. I sat down and met with Kyle Hogan, who's the producer of it and the narrator of it. And just hearing him tell me the story over lunch, I was engaged very similar to the way that I was engaged in the Aaron Hernandez podcast. So I said, this is something that I definitely want to get behind. I'm really excited about this. And when the audience hears the story of everything that he had to go through and everything he had to persevere, so it's a true test of his faith and belief and where he is now. I'm really excited about that project. So thank you for asking. It comes out January 28th is when it's going to be released on all the platforms for podcasts.
With you having done all that you have in your career, what is it that keeps you going these days? Like, what's your motivation now?
It's people ask me that, right? And I don't think that I just don't think I can sit down. I'm just not built. I'm just not built like that. I think that, I will never stop working at something. You know, even if I'm quote unquote retired at whatever, the one thing about this industry is that we don't retire from the industry retires us. But even if whatever, you know, it's the truth. But even if at some point I'm not acting or doing it, I'm pretty sure that God willing, you know, I'm gonna be working until the day that I'm not able to anymore, because I just, even days when, you know, like this past weekend, you know, I didn't really have, this week is light at work. I didn't really have anything to prep for, but I needed to do something. I needed to do something creative. I needed to do something productive. And I've just have always been like that, you know, even when, like now when I'm not working, you know, I have other business ventures. I own a car dealership in Glendora, California. So I'm focused on that. So I'm constantly doing something, because that's just in me. I'm a Capricorn, so I think Capricorns have that natural ambition.
Oh, by the way, happy belated birthday. You're a New Year's Day baby, right?
Yeah. Thank you. Yep. I'm 28. I'll be 29 next year. Yeah.
Listen, I thought you had turned 26. That was just.
Yeah. Thank
I
you.
thought you were 26. Sorry that I underbossed you a little bit.